Alright, let's get something straight before we even dive in. I don't celebrate death. Never. Not for a political enemy, not for a talking head I can't stand. That line, they deserved it. Fuck no. That's poison. Life is heavy, and once it's gone, it's gone. And yet here we are talking about the assassination of Charlie Kirk by a 22-year-old kid. A shot fired at a man, yeah, but also at the very idea of civil disagreement. And don't twist it, because I don't care if you're right wing, left wing, or a fucking chicken wing. This isn't about where you fall. It's about the fact that we've got people thinking violence is the only way to make their point. And that's a fucking dark place to be. And then we have school shootings. Fucking hey. Another headline. Another wave of names turned into hashtags before parents can even bury their kids. We've gotten numb, desensitized. Like this is just the cost of doing business in America. Meanwhile, the politicians are screaming, demonizing each other, calling each other monsters, traitors, Nazis. But here's the question. If every opponent is a demon, what happens when you convince yourself demons don't deserve to live? That's when rhetoric becomes a blade. That's when politics mutates into war. Athens and Sparta, they were drowning in the same sickness 2,400 years ago. And I wish I could tell you it was some new age shit, but it wasn't. Citizens didn't just argue in the assembly. They assassinated rivals, staged coups, purged entire factions. When the words ran out, the swords came out. And when the swords came out, Greece bled. Now, I'm not saying we're Athens, and I'm not saying we're Sparta. I can't help but think we're rhyming with history. And it's a rhyme scheme written in blood. So welcome to part 2 of the Peloponnesian War. Don't hear this as just old battles with weird names you can't pronounce. Hear it for what it is. A cautionary tale. Because what tore Athens apart back then, it sounds an awful lot like what's tearing us apart right now. Athens didn't fall because Sparta stormed its gates. Not at first. Athens fell because it locked itself inside. Because it trusted stone over soil, ships over people, and strategy over humanity. The long walls were supposed to make Athens invincible. Instead, they turned the city into a coffin. The first years of war weren't about glorious battles. They were about fear, arrogance, and the slow death of the city, suffocating inside its own brilliance. And that's where we pick up our story. Because Athens was a city that believed in itself too much. Kind of like America. That's the only way to start this. They had beaten back Persia. They had raised marble out of dirt. They had convinced themselves they were chosen by history to be eternal. So when war came with Sparta, Pericles, the great statesman, the silver-tongued strategist, sold a plan. Hide behind the walls. Let the fleet feed the city. Sparta will grow impatient and leave. Victory would not come from glorious battles, but from outlasting the meatheads of the Peloponnesus. It looked brilliant on paper. It was suicide in practice. The long walls stretched from Athens to Piraeus, a pair of stone arteries pumping life from sea to city. They were not just walls. They were an ideology. They declared that Athens could never be starved, never cornered, and never isolated. Inside, the people believed themselves untouchable. They had democracy. They had ships. They had gods on their side. But walls don't keep out air, or sickness, or fear. As Sparta burned farms outside the walls, Athenians, with their animals, their families, and everything they owned, packed into the clay houses and alleyways, already choked with bodies. Imagine a city designed for 100,000, suddenly doubling or tripling, with no sewage plan, no clean water, and no hope of leaving. The proud farmers of Attica, who once grew olives on ancestral land, now slept shoulder to shoulder in courtyards and stables, listening to their fields burning in the distance. The city stank. I mean bad. Human waste pooled in the streets. The agora, once filled with merchants and philosophers, now doubled as a refugee camp. People shouted, argued, sharded. They begged for bread, prayed at shrines, and in this suffocating press of humanity, something unseen slipped in, carried by rats, or by fleas, or by the gods' cruel humor. The plague began as whispers, a cough, a fever, bodies collapsing in the heat. But then it spread like fire in dry reeds. Thucydides, who lived through it, wrote the symptoms as if etching scars onto paper. Burning eyes, vomiting, bleeding throats, skin blotched and blackened, extremities rotting. People died in days. Others survived, but were left permanently scarred. The sickness spared no rank. Beggars and generals died side by side. Corpses piled in temples. Funeral pyres were stolen at night by desperate families trying to burn their own dead. Rituals collapsed. Faith collapsed. The Athenians, the people who once built temples to every god, abandoned prayer when the gods abandoned them. They stopped believing in justice, in law, in tomorrow. Why obey rules when you might be coughing blood in the gutter by sunset? Men looted houses openly. Women stole food from shrines. Some indulged in orgies and drunken revels, reasoning that if death was certain, pleasure was the only defiance left. Pericles, the architect of the long walls, watched his plan rot in real time. He had convinced Athens to trust walls over land, strategy over honor. And for that, his people called him a coward, a tyrant, a fool. His own sons died in the plague. His prestige, gone. He gave one last speech, begging Athenians to endure, to remember the greatness of their city. But the plague didn't give a fuck about speeches. It killed him too. When Pericles died, Athens lost more than a leader. It lost the illusion of invincibility. The city was still standing, but inside it was cracked and broken. The people were sick, paranoid, and starving. And Sparta was still out there, patiently stalking their prey. This was the turning point. Not a battle, not a treaty, not a political vote. Disease, human frailty, the thing no walls could keep out. Athens had planned for everything except reality, and the price was a generation coughing blood in the streets. Every farm family from Attica was huddled inside. These weren't city people. They were farmers, shepherds, olive growers who had lived on the same land for generations. Their fields now burned. Their homes were gone. And they crammed into Athens. The streets overflowed. Whole families slept under porticos, in the shadow of temples, in warehouses near the port. There were goats in the courtyards, pigs rooted through garbage. Sanitation broke first. Chamber pots dumped from windows. Human waste sipping in the streets. Drinking water was poisonous. Athens, once the democratic jewel of Greece, stunk like shit. The markets grew tense. Food shortages meant prices doubled, tripled. Merchants were accused of hoarding. Riots broke out. Daily life became a fight to stand in line. People cursed Pericles in the streets. Then the plague. Nobody knows its exact nature. The debate still rages. Typhus, smallpox. Thucydides gave us the earliest clinical account in Western history. And it's horrifying. It began with a sudden burning in your head, redness and inflammation in the eyes, throats and tongues bleeding. Your breath stunk, sneezing and hoarseness. A cough followed. Your chest became inflamed, stomach convulsions, vomiting bile, ulcers in the gut. The body actually looked red, livid, breaking out in pustules and sores. Victims burned so hot they stripped naked, desperate to plunge into water. Many drowned themselves in cisterns. Some survived, but they were missing extremities, blinded, their minds damaged. Others lingered in delirium, clawing at themselves until they died. No cure. Every prayer fell on deaf ears. Physicians died first, tending to patients. Priests abandoned temples. Thucydides says bodies were left in houses rotting because no one dared to enter. Corpses stacked in the streets, half buried in shallow graves. Dogs and birds feeding on the dead. The social order collapsed. When tomorrow is uncertain, why obey the law? Men stole openly. Women desecrated shrines to eat the offerings. Parents abandoned children. Children left parents. Ritual funerals, the most sacred duty of Greek life, were tossed aside. Bodies were thrown on strangers' pyres or burned at night. Faith collapsed too. The Athenians had worshipped Athena, Zeus, Apollo, Demeter. But what god would send this horror to their city? If the gods cannot protect Athens, then why bother with piety? People turned from reverence to indulgence, chasing pleasure as the only defiance against certain death. Pericles was broken. His plan, brilliant in design, had created the very breeding ground for disaster. The long walls trapped his people, and disease flourished in that human swamp. His enemies accused him of cowardice, of hubris, of dragging Athens into ruin. He begged the assembly for patience, for discipline, for faith in his strategy. He gave speeches defending democracy, reminding Athenians that they were greater than Sparta. He spoke with fire and eloquence. But words mean little when you're dying. He lost his sons, he lost his allies, and finally, he lost himself. The man who had built the Parthenon, who had made Athens the cultural capital of the world, who had convinced his city to hide behind stone and trust in ships. Died coughing blood and losing his mind. With Pericles gone, Athens was adrift. The plague burned itself out eventually, leaving tens of thousands dead. But the survivors were not the same people who had gone into the walls. They emerged paranoid, traumatized, quick to anger, and hungry for revenge. Their democracy, once brilliant and visionary, began to listen less to reason and more to demagogues who promised blood and victory. Sparta had not broken Athens. The walls had not broken Athens. The plague did. And here's the darkest truth. This wasn't an accident. It wasn't divine wrath. It was the inevitable result of human arrogance. Walls can keep out spears, but not sickness. Strategy can win battles, but not stop microbes. And when a society refuses to plan for its weakest point, that's where reality hits hardest. The long walls were supposed to guarantee survival. Instead, they became a coffin lid for thousands, and the death of Pericles symbolized more than just one man's fall. It was the end of the Golden Age in Athens, and the beginning of a long, bitter decline into madness. Because once fear eats democracy, reason dies, and in the void, only rage remains. That's it for part 2. If you like the show, hit that follow. Everybody needs to tone it down. We're all the same fucking people. We're just trying to make it through the day. Raise our kids right. Send them to school and hopefully have them not be hurt. So, we need to change. Top to bottom, bottom to top. Everybody needs to tone it down. One love. Stay safe.